I'm lucky. I've had a multifaceted careers, quite successful. I've been a journalist. I've traveled all over North America. I've been to Europe on assignment. I've gone from being a sports writer and covering Canada's national hockey team all over the place when it was headquartered in Winnipeg. I've been a finance editor. I've been a political commentator. We've interviewed captains of industry, prime ministers, premiers. We've sat down with, I think, important, influential people. Some of the greatest names in golf. We've been one-on-one with them. We've gone into private consulting, enjoyed a wonderful career there again, meeting people, taking on projects that on the inside of political parties, for example. Dark, stinky place to work, but great experience. A series of artwork achieves two purposes. One is a very selfish one for the artist. And when you're doing a series of images on one particular subject or theme, you're constantly examining, re-examining what it is you're trying to express, what you want to get at, and you come up with very interesting insights out of that. You come up with different methods, materials, medias of putting it together that and it's usually over a long period of time. The other thing is that if you cannot possibly capture everything there is to say on a subject in a 3 or 4 pieces, you cannot possibly have explored that subject in an exhaustive way. But trust me, if you do 20 or 30 or 40 pieces on the same general subject or specific subject, and you're trying to make them say something and to mean something different, each one of them, to bring something out that hadn't been said in the other pieces, you're going to have dug very deep into yourself and your artistic abilities, your skills, your mechanics, as well as you're going to open doors that you didn't realize that you could open in your mind before. It's just simply you've got to push yourself to go through them. Number 2, as a purely commercial benefit, in that if you develop a reputation for doing long series of work, you become dependable. People who collect your work begin to look for the new part of your series. Decorators, architects, interior designers know that this artist does extended series of imagery, that they can count on that work being available this year, next year, whatever, for large projects. If you're a one-off artist who only does one every maybe a couple in the series, fine, you'll get commissions, you will get interest, but as far as being part of large projects, as far as a reputation that is understood in that particular part of the business, that's just not attainable if you're a one-off person. But that may be fine too. But if you're interested in having your work installed in 20 pieces in a new headquarters for a bank, then you have to deal in large series. That's just the way it is. The New Landscape series has been part of my life for almost 15 years now. It started as a fairly small format. You can see some of the earlier work behind me here. This is I do a book every 2 years that updates all the work in the New Landscape series. In this book, there are 6 distinct periods. They go from small work, early work, they go through different materials, up until the more recent period where I'm doing 4-foot by 4-foot prints. Now we're transitioning into the quilted landscape series, which is the final, that's the most recent form and shape of new landscapes. And where we'll go in another year or two, I don't know. We may stay with quilted landscapes for another year. We may go back to one of the earlier phases and revisit it, because we've got a lot of ideas I wished I'd had back then. But that's the beauty of the rust print and the mixed media. You're never boxed in to one particular road or direction. And I have to admit, I am a very lazy artist. I get bored easily, and when I get bored, I start looking for new directions and new ideas. But why I will adapt and change my new landscapes probably many times in the future, but there will be a continuation, and a very traceable continuation of the whole series, which numbers probably there's well over 600, 700 pieces in the new landscape series now. So it's a very, it is my largest body of work, but it's one that probably won't end until I decide I'm no longer an artist. For the first time in my life, I actually get to do art that has a strong underpinning of importance to me. I've done a lot of art over the years, but with other purposes in mind. Now I'm doing it to try and get people to understand that underneath all my art is this thing called rust prints, rust oxidation. And rust is basically the final stage in a useful, practical material turning into useless, throwaway status. And so rust is a kind of a metaphoric material for society in some ways, for our environment in some ways. And yet I try and make this landscape, beautiful landscapes, that have this underpainting of rust, which basically should be a question mark for people looking at it. Why is this rust here? What does it mean? We're just in the midst of starting into a bunch of rust prints mounted on wood panels. These panels sometimes will sit around for days or weeks at a time as we kind of look at them and see if we can see anything in a landscape theme or an abstraction. And in this case, we had about 30 of these to look at for the past couple of weeks. We were doing a workshop nearby, and we had 30 panels for the student artists to choose from. And what we'll do now is we'll work into them. Some of these have got a little bit of early soft pastels worked into them to see if we can get some tone and form. Then we'll start working into them with a little more detail, a little sharper, a little more intense color. And probably a week or so from now, they'll roll across the finish line. And then they'll be coated with 3 or 4 coats of varnish to protect it. I like to talk about the Broken Dory series. It's a series of small metal sculptures that started a couple years back, and it kind of reflects how I feel about rural culture and the disappearing values of the small boat fishing industry, the coastal communities endangered. But it also kind of shows how my work in the big rust prints transfer into something like this, because the way I make my big rust prints on steel sheeting, Once they've produced 2 or 3 or 4 prints, basically the steel, the iron sheeting is tired. The rust is no longer quite as strong. So then they get cut up, and basically I take them out to my welder, to my little shop out in the back of the studio here, and we recycle them into new pieces, but still underneath there's that continuity of rural culture, concern, and a way to express it, an artist to express it. So I like that. I like the way the broken dories come across. I think some fishermen have wandered in here on occasion and kind of said that's not a dory, but that's okay. That's not. That's the way she goes. But I think the Broken Dory series will probably extend out into just like the landscape, the series, the new landscape series. This will morph or transfer into a different series, but along that same lines, a kind of an expression of concern about rural culture and depopulation of the rural areas.